Clara sat by the window, staring at the raindrops racing each other down the glass, her fingers wrapped around a warm cup of tea, the steam brushing her cheeks in the quiet of the empty house, and for the first time in weeks, she felt the weight of solitude pressing in on her, the kind of stillness that made every memory and every longing rise up like ghosts in her mind. The house, usually bustling with chores and errands, now felt like a hollow shell, every creak of the wooden floor a reminder of the absence of laughter, the absence of voices, and Clara's thoughts wandered to the years she had spent chasing responsibilities, taking care of everyone else, giving pieces of herself away until she could barely remember who she was outside of being someone's mother, someone's daughter, someone's friend, and now, as the rain painted silver streaks on the glass, she realized how much she had missed moments like this, the simple, quiet moments where she could just be, breathe, and let herself feel without the constant push of the outside world demanding more, needing more. And yet even in this rare pause, she felt a quiet ache, a longing for connection, for warmth, for something unexpected to break the monotony, something to remind her that life could still surprise her. And as she leaned back in the chair, letting the rhythm of the rain soothe her, she thought about how fleeting these quiet days were, how quickly they passed, and how easily they could be interrupted. Though she welcomed interruption even if it brought anxiety, because the alternative was emptiness, and the emptiness was harder to face than any surprise, any shock, any moment of chaos or laughter or tears, and so she closed her eyes for a brief second, inhaling deeply the scent of rain and old wood and tea, trying to let go of the tension in her shoulders, when the sound of the front door opening made her freeze mid-breath, a small, almost hesitant creak that somehow carried both hope and uncertainty, and her heart leapt in a way it hadn't in months, a flutter of anticipation and fear twisting together in her chest, because in that instant, she realized that this quiet day, this ordinary, uneventful day, was no longer entirely hers, that someone else had stepped into the frame of her life without warning, and though she didn't yet know who it was or why they had come, or what this sudden presence would mean, she felt a spark of life she hadn't expected, a mixture of joy and nervousness as the footsteps moved from the door toward her, light, cautious, yet determined, each step a reminder that life was still moving, still offering surprises. And Clara, caught between relief and tension, allowed herself to sit up straighter, gripping her tea tightly, the warmth now a shield against the sudden rush of emotion, and as she tilted her head, listening closely to the rhythm of those approaching steps, she imagined 1,000 possibilities, each more improbable and hopeful than the last, and with every heartbeat, the air seemed to thrum with potential, the quiet house alive with expectation, and Clara realized that in the span of a single second, the world could change, that life could intrude upon her solitude with something she had longed for, something she hadn't dared to hope for, and as the footsteps drew nearer, she felt a mixture of excitement, nervousness, and longing swirl inside her, a gentle storm that mirrored the weather outside. And in that suspended moment, she understood that the calm she had cherished was over, replaced by the pulse of something new, and she could feel, deep in her bones, that this unexpected visitor, whoever it might be, would bring change, emotion, perhaps even confrontation. And though her mind raced with questions, with curiosity, with a tinge of fear, her heart opened just a little, willing to take the risk of hope, of surprise, of connection, because after so many quiet, lonely days she was ready, almost desperately so, to let life in again, to let someone break through the silence. And the thought alone sent a shiver down her spine, a mixture of anticipation and the sweet pain of longing, as she waited, poised, aware that the next few moments would shift everything, that the mundane day she had planned was gone, and in its place was a possibility, fragile yet thrilling, a chance for joy, for reunion, for the simple human connection she had almost forgotten. And as she inhaled the scent of rain one more time, her chest tightening in both fear and hope, the next sound, the next movement promised to change the quiet of the house forever. The footsteps grew louder, and Clara's chest tightened with a mixture of excitement and nervousness as the figure at the door slowly became clearer. And when Alex stepped fully into the room, dripping rain from his coat and hair, she felt a sudden jolt of recognition and relief that made her heart skip, because it was him, her son, older now, taller, carrying a quiet confidence that reminded her of the boy who once clung to her hand for reassurance yet now moved with a new maturity that surprised her. He paused for a moment, his eyes scanning the familiar room, and then they found hers, warm and wide with emotion, and Clara could see the subtle changes in him. The soft lines of adolescence fading into the beginnings of adulthood, the slight broadening of his shoulders, the calm in his voice that masked years of experiences she hadn't witnessed, and without thinking, she rose to meet him, her arms instinctively opening as if to gather not just him, but the time that had passed between them, the years of small silences, the quiet moments missed, the memories they hadn't yet shared, and Alex stepped forward, hesitating just slightly, then closing the space between them as he leaned into her embrace, a rush of warmth flooding the room as their hands touched and her fingers instinctively smoothed damp hair from his forehead, brushing away the droplets of rain like they could also brush away the distance and the lonely days they had both endured. "I didn't expect you so soon," Clara whispered, her voice catching, filled with a combination of joy, relief, and lingering worry, and Alex gave a small, almost shy smile, a flicker of something unsaid in his eyes, as if he had more to tell her than just a simple surprise visit, and that hesitation, that unspoken weight, tugged at her heart even as she clung to the moment of reunion, sensing layers of emotion beneath his calm exterior that made the room feel charged with tension and affection, because it was not just his presence that mattered. It was the reminder of all the time she had longed to see him, to hear his voice, to feel connected again after months and years of brief calls, missed holidays, and postponed visits, and now with him finally here, the air was thick with possibility, with words unsaid, with the gentle ache of longing that neither of them had fully acknowledged until this very instant, and as they stepped back slightly, still holding on to each other's gaze, Clara noticed the flicker of vulnerability in Alex's eyes, the way he shifted his weight, the way his fingers brushed against hers without quite letting go, subtle gestures that spoke volumes about his feelings, about the quiet confessions he had bottled up inside, and she realized that this was more than a casual visit. This was an emotional crossing, a meeting of hearts that had grown apart yet never truly forgotten each other. And in that realization, she felt a tear slip down her cheek, a mixture of happiness and the bittersweet pang of lost time. Yet she smiled through it, because this moment, fragile and fleeting though it might be, was real, and it was theirs. And as Alex finally spoke, breaking the silence, his voice low, measured, yet tinged with warmth, he said, "I wanted to surprise you." And in those simple words Clara felt layers of care, effort, and longing, the way he had planned this, the thought he had put into it, the risk he had taken to be here, and she squeezed his hand gently, feeling the pulse of life and love through that touch, a silent acknowledgement that they were reconnecting, rebuilding, and even in the quiet room, the energy shifted, a gentle charge filling the space as if the house itself recognized the reunion, the emotional tide rising and falling with every heartbeat, and they moved to sit on the couch, shoulders brushing, eyes meeting, an unspoken conversation passing between them, a dialogue of shared history, mutual longing, and tentative hope, where every glance, every small smile, every sigh carried meaning beyond words. And Clara felt herself listening not just to what Alex said but to what he did not say, noticing the tremor in his voice when he laughed, the careful choice of words that hinted at experiences and emotions she was only beginning to understand, and she realized that in this moment, the reunion was not just about joy, it was about reconciliation, about understanding the man her son had become, about bridging the gap of time, distance, and unspoken feelings that had quietly built walls between them. And even as she reached for his hand again, gripping it lightly, her mind raced through memories of the past, flashes of small arguments, times of worry, nights spent thinking about him, moments she had missed being by his side, and in that swirl of recollection and present emotion, she knew that the next few hours would be transformative, that their conversation, their shared space, even the simplest gestures, would define a new chapter in their relationship. A chapter where connection could be restored. And as Alex leaned back slightly, letting the rhythm of their breathing sink for a moment, a quiet tension hung in the air, a promise of more words, more confessions, more revelations waiting just beneath the surface, and Clara felt a thrill of anticipation mixed with a tender ache, a recognition that life often offered the sweetest moments when least expected, that love, care, and understanding could arrive suddenly, like a gentle knock on the door. After weeks of solitude, and as they sat together, side by side yet still exploring the emotional space between them, she felt a mixture of relief, gratitude, and cautious hope, sensing that the day would unfold into discoveries, into laughter, into shared memories that would mend old wounds and create new ones. And in that slow, delicate unfolding, Clara realized that surprises could carry depth, that presence could heal absence, and that sometimes, the heart needed only a single person's arrival to awaken it fully, to remind it of connection, of warmth, and of the tender, complicated beauty of love between parent and child, a love that endured despite distance, mistakes, and the quiet ache of missing one another. And as the rain continued outside, tapping softly on the roof, a soundtrack to their reunion, Clara and Alex sat together, feeling both the weight of the past and the lightness of a new beginning, the unspoken acknowledgement between them, a quiet promise that they would find their way back to each other, step by step, word by word, smile by smile. And in that charged, hopeful moment, every heartbeat spoke louder than words, every glance carried meaning, and every small gesture was a thread weaving their hearts closer, binding them in a gentle, emotional, and unforgettable reunion that would mark the start of a deeply cherished chapter in both their lives. The footsteps grew louder, echoing softly across the quiet house, and Clara's heart leapt as she realized that someone had arrived, though she didn't yet know who. And when the figure came fully into view, she felt a rush of recognition, relief, and a strange, fluttering anticipation. It was Alex, her son, now older, taller, carrying the same spark she remembered from his childhood but tempered with the calm of adolescence. And for a moment she could only stare, taking in the small changes, the curve of his jaw, the depth in his eyes, the way his wet hair clung slightly to his forehead, the hesitant smile that held both excitement and something unspoken. And she felt a mixture of longing and wonder that made her chest ache, because though she had imagined this moment countless times, imagined the joy, the laughter, the embrace, reality held a weight she hadn't anticipated. The full intensity of seeing him after weeks apart, of finally feeling the warmth of his presence in the house she thought she knew but now felt different, alive with anticipation, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to witness the reunion. Alex hesitated for a heartbeat, just long enough for Clara's nerves to tighten and her mind to spin with questions. Why now? Why the surprise? What had changed in him since she last saw him? And then, without another pause, he stepped fully into her space, reaching out instinctively as if guided by the invisible bond that had always connected them. And Clara rose too, opening her arms wide, feeling her fingers tingle with the need to hold, to gather up the months of distance, the lost words, the missed calls, the fleeting moments they had been unable to share. And when they finally embraced, the tension of absence, the ache of longing, and the warmth of familiarity collided in a single heartbeat, a rhythm that echoed through the room, filling the silence with soundless joy. And Clara felt tears prick her eyes, her voice catching as she whispered, "I didn't expect you so soon." And Alex smiled, shyly, almost embarrassed, the corners of his mouth twitching in a way that made her laugh softly, the sound light and airy, a balm to the quiet heaviness that had filled the house for so long. And yet even in his smile, she could sense a hesitation, a shadow of something unspoken, a weight he carried that he wasn't yet ready to reveal. And that subtle pause made her heart clench, because she knew this visit was more than a simple surprise. It was a crossing into territory they had avoided for too long, a space filled with emotions too complex to capture in words, yet impossible to ignore. And Clara felt her mind race as she tried to absorb him, to read him, to understand what had brought him here, noticing every detail, the way he tucked his wet sleeve behind his wrist, the nervous tapping of his shoe against the floor, the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes flickered toward hers and then away, like a careful dance between connection and restraint. And she realized that beneath the joy of seeing him was an undercurrent of emotions neither of them had prepared for, a quiet storm of longing, worry, regret, and hope that made every second feel heavier and lighter all at once, as if time itself had paused to let them reconcile the past before moving forward. She guided him to the couch, and they sat together, side by side, but not touching yet. And Clara felt the space between them filled with questions, memories, and unsaid words, the kind that only years of shared history and separation could create. And she watched him closely, noting the subtle ways he shifted in his seat, the way his fingers traced patterns on the armrest, the micro-expressions that hinted at feelings he hadn't voiced, the fleeting glances that spoke of experiences he hadn't shared with her, the mix of pride and regret in his posture. And she understood that this was their moment to reconnect, to bridge a gap that had grown quietly over time, to speak without words, to let the silence itself communicate what their hearts couldn't yet name. And she reached out, letting her hand rest lightly over his, feeling the warmth, the pulse of life, the subtle pressure that said more than he could yet admit. And Alex didn't pull away. Instead, he let her hand stay, almost tentatively, almost testing the strength of the bond that had carried them through years of separation. And Clara's chest swelled with an ache that was part joy, part longing, part recognition of time lost. and she realized how much she had missed this, the closeness, the laughter, the gentle comfort of being near someone who mattered more than words could express. And even as the rain continued to drum softly against the windows, marking the passage of time. Outside, inside the room, time seemed to stretch and condense, each heartbeat amplified, each breath laden with meaning, and Clara felt herself wanting to fill the space with words, to ask everything she had longed to ask, to hear everything he had felt, to make up for the months of silence, but she paused, sensing that some moments required patience, that some truths needed the gentle unfolding of conversation, and so they sat, eyes meeting, hands brushing, shoulders nearly touching, and in that quiet, shared stillness, the house seemed to hum with life, with the unspoken acknowledgement that this reunion was a turning point, that it carried the possibility of understanding, forgiveness, connection, and hope. And Alex finally spoke, his voice low, calm, yet tinged with something heavier, something heartfelt. "I wanted to surprise you." And in those few words, Clara felt the weight of thought, the effort behind the action, the subtle courage it took for him to come here, to cross the threshold of distance and time, to offer not just a presence but a piece of himself. And she squeezed his hand gently in response, a silent affirmation that she recognized it, that she felt it, that she accepted the gesture as both gift and bridge. And in that moment, laughter bubbled between them, soft, tentative, freeing, and Clara felt the tension loosen slightly, the quiet house now filled with warmth and sound, the kind that comes not from words but from proximity, from shared existence, from mutual recognition that despite the distance and the years, they were still connected, still part of each other's lives in ways that could never be undone. And as Alex leaned back slightly, a small shiver running through him from the wetness he carried, Clara noticed the subtle details, the slight tilt of his head, the flicker of nervousness in his eyes, the tiny movements that betrayed excitement and apprehension simultaneously. And she realized that every gesture, no matter how small, carried meaning, a story within a story, a conversation in silence, and the emotional intensity of the room surged, delicate but undeniable, because this was a reunion layered with complexity. Joy intertwined with guilt, love mingled with longing, anticipation wrapped in unspoken fear, and Clara felt each element pressing gently against her heart, filling her with a tenderness that made her both ache and smile at the same time. And she remembered the nights spent imagining what he might say if he returned, wondering how much he had grown, how much of himself he had shaped outside her sight. And now, seeing him, she could sense that he had arrived not just physically, but emotionally, carrying experiences, reflections, and feelings that were ready to be shared, that wanted to find a home in her understanding, her patience, her love. And she welcomed it, every piece, every flicker of hesitation, every subtle tremor in his voice or posture, because it all meant he had come, he had crossed the invisible threshold. And the quiet house suddenly felt alive, vibrant with the gentle tension of emotional reconnection, the kind that unfolds slowly yet powerfully, threading the past, present, and future together. And as they began to talk, softly, carefully, with pauses that allowed each thought and feeling to settle, Clara realized that this day, this unplanned, unexpected visit, was more than a surprise. It was a delicate realignment of hearts, a tender recalibration of love, trust, and understanding. And every laugh, every sigh, every glance they exchanged served as a stitch in the fabric of their renewed connection, binding them closer, and making the room, the house, the quiet day itself feel transformed into a space of possibility, hope, and gentle emotional awakening, as if the rain outside had washed away more than dust, but also the lingering distance of time and circumstance, leaving them with nothing but the pure, fragile, exhilarating presence of each other, the realization that moments like these, though fleeting, could carry the depth of years, and that sometimes a simple surprise visit could reshape the heart in ways one could not predict. And Clara, watching Alex with renewed awe and love, knew that the rest of the day, the hours to come, would be filled with laughter, conversation, discovery, and quiet reflection, a slow unfolding of everything they had missed, a gentle rekindling of their bond. And she smiled softly, holding onto his hand, feeling the pulse of life, love, and reconnection, aware that this day, this moment would linger in her memory forever, a testament to the power of presence, the courage to surprise, and the enduring strength of the heart's attachment. And as the rain softened outside, a quiet promise settled over them, that though time had separated them, their bond had never weakened, and this reunion, tender, emotional, and full of unspoken depth, was only the beginning of the next chapter of their story together. The storm outside finally began to ease, the rain tapering off into soft drizzles that tapped gently against the windows, and inside, Clara and Alex remained seated close together on the couch, a quiet warmth filling the room that neither had anticipated but both felt deeply, the kind of warmth that comes from shared presence, from vulnerability accepted without judgment, from long-held feelings finally given room to breathe. And Clara noticed the subtle shifts in Alex's expression, the slight softening of his eyes, the careful way he leaned back yet kept his hand within hers, the faint tilt of his head when he listened intently to her voice, and she realized that in this simple act of sitting together, sharing space, letting words and silences mingle, something profound was occurring, a gentle reconciliation that had begun the moment he stepped through the door, and now it unfolded fully, slowly, beautifully, as they allowed themselves to reconnect, to acknowledge the time lost and the emotions that had grown quietly in the spaces between them, and Clara felt her heart swell with gratitude, a mixture of relief, love, and tender hope, because this reunion was not just about seeing each other again. It was about understanding each other, meeting each other in the complexity of life, of choices made, of experiences shaped independently yet intertwined by bond, and she could see that Alex carried subtle traces of everything they had shared and everything he had faced alone, the small scars of learning, the faint glow of pride, the slight hesitations that spoke of moments of doubt, and she felt a profound empathy for him, a deep desire to support, to nurture, to reassure him that he was seen fully, without expectation, without pressure, only acceptance, and he met her gaze with equal intensity, the vulnerability in his eyes mirrored by the cautious hope in his expression, and Clara realized that this delicate balance, the mixture of courage, trust, and affection, was precisely what made this reunion so powerful, so transformative, and the quiet rhythms of their conversation, punctuated by gentle laughter, soft sighs, and small smiles, carried a weight far beyond words, because each gesture, each glance, each carefully chosen phrase held meaning, conveyed emotion, and strengthened the invisible threads that bound them together. And she thought about all the moments of longing, the nights she had spent imagining this, the silent prayers for his happiness, the gentle regrets for missed opportunities, and now, as she watched him speak about his life, his challenges, his dreams, she felt a balance of pride and humility, of joy and wistfulness, knowing that while she had nurtured him, he had grown in ways beyond her control, yet the connection remained intact, resilient, and beautifully alive. And as Alex spoke of his small triumphs and quiet victories, she noticed how his eyes lit up with a subtle pride, how the corners of his mouth lifted in a fleeting smile, how his fingers traced gentle patterns on the couch armrest as if anchoring himself in the moment, and she felt a mixture of admiration and tenderness that made her chest tighten with emotion, the kind that is both exhilarating and humbling. And Clara reached out, letting her hand brush his lightly, resting there with a soft, reassuring touch that said everything words could not, that communicated love, acceptance, and the quiet promise that she was here, fully present, attentive, and ready to support him in whatever he carried. And Alex responded in kind, his hand shifting subtly to meet hers, a small, gentle squeeze acknowledging the connection, confirming the bond, and they both felt a rush of warmth, the kind that fills the chest and spreads to the tips of fingers, the gentle electricity of emotional alignment. And Clara realized that even though the years apart had created distance, the essence of their relationship had remained quietly resilient, and now it was flourishing, delicate, yet unshakable, as if this single afternoon of presence and attention could rewrite months and years of absence, knitting together the past, present, and future in a single profound experience. And as they spoke further, moving from reflections of childhood to present-day thoughts, dreams, and small fears, Clara sensed an emotional depth in Alex that she had only glimpsed before, the complexity of someone who had grown independently, learned lessons alone, and yet still sought her approval, her love, her understanding. And she felt a deep, almost reverent admiration, recognizing the strength and sensitivity that existed together in him. And she wanted to tell him everything she felt, the pride, the longing, the quiet happiness, but she let her actions convey the words, letting her gaze linger, letting her fingers rest against his, letting every small gesture carry the weight of love. And Alex, in response, allowed himself to relax into the moment, leaning slightly closer, meeting her eyes fully, offering the honesty of his heart without a single forced word. And Clara realized that this unspoken communication, the delicate dance of presence and attention, carried more meaning than any long speech could, that the simple act of being together, fully attentive, was the greatest gift they could offer one another, and as the rain continued its gentle patter outside, soft enough to be almost melodic, she felt the room transform, the air thick with emotional resonance, the house itself somehow recognizing the depth of the moment, echoing back the rhythms of connection, the delicate heartbeat of reconciliation, the tender, mutual acknowledgement of love and care that had never truly faded despite time and distance, and Clara marveled at the way subtlety could carry so much, how a glance, a touch, a shared breath could communicate volumes, and she reflected on all the small moments they had missed: birthdays, school events, quiet nights together, brief phone calls that never fully captured emotion, and realized that this moment made up for many of them, not by erasing the past, but by offering a richer, fuller, more profound connection, and she felt an overwhelming surge of gratitude for the chance to be present with him now, fully, without distraction, fully attuned to his presence, his energy, his emotions, his unspoken needs. And Alex mirrored this attentiveness, his posture softening, his voice carrying subtle inflections of warmth, curiosity, and tenderness, and they continued to speak, slowly exploring topics ranging from the ordinary to the deeply personal, sharing thoughts, worries, and reflections. And with each exchange, Clara sensed the rebuilding of trust, the gentle restoration of closeness, the subtle weaving together of hearts that had been apart but never truly disconnected, and she felt the pure, quiet joy of being able to witness him, fully alive, fully present, fully herself in his presence. And as he shared a memory of their past, something small but emotionally charged, she laughed softly, a sound that mingled with relief and delight, and Alex joined, his own laughter carrying the weight of years, the release of tension, and the affirmation of connection, and she realized that these moments, fragile yet potent, were the building blocks of a renewed relationship, a foundation of mutual understanding and love that could support them both moving forward. And as they leaned back, the room quiet except for the rain and the soft hum of life returning to their shared space, Clara felt a profound sense of completion, a recognition that despite the challenges, the distance, the quiet ache of absence, they had found their way back to one another. And she felt a gentle hope rise, knowing that while the past could not be changed, the present and future were theirs to shape, and in the stillness, the subtle energy, the delicate interplay of vulnerability and strength, she understood the quiet power of presence, of attention, of love expressed in action as much as in words. And Alex's hand found hers again, a silent reaffirmation of the bond they had restored, a gesture small yet immense, and Clara's heart swelled with tenderness, pride, and gratitude, feeling the weight of the day, the depth of emotion, and the promise of what lay ahead. And as the clouds began to part outside, letting soft sunlight filter through, casting a warm glow over the room, she realized that the reunion, the laughter, the shared glances, the gentle touches, and the quiet words had transformed not only the afternoon but her heart, that this day would remain etched in memory, a testament to the enduring, resilient, and tender connection between parent and child, a connection capable of weathering storms, bridging absence, and carrying the promise of countless shared moments yet to come. And in that light, Clara and Alex sat together, hand in hand, hearts aligned, a quiet smile shared between them, knowing that life, in all its unpredictability, had brought them back to this moment, delicate, emotional, full of hope, and infinitely cherished, marking the beginning of a new chapter of closeness, understanding, and enduring love that would ripple through every day to follow, a gentle, profound, and unforgettable bond renewed in the quiet after the storm.